Thanks so much for the generous introduction. It's something, it's always great to be back here in Hyderabad. So I think for a lot of you guys, probably the obvious question is sort of why. So the first, when I meet with someone or I'm introduced, always the initial question is always, so, why are you here? Why are you doing ZoomCar? What made you what really compelled you to travel, 15,000 kilometers to come and start this off? And, it's definitely, a very, very fair and valid question. So I think I'll just start off and give a little bit more color, give a little bit more insight into that and kind of go and snowball from there. So I think for me, of course, I'm American. I grew up, born and raised in New York City. Something that I went to school at the University of Pennsylvania at Wharton, which is one of the larger business schools in the U.S. And so my focus, so I studied international relations, actually. So I studied about India and China in school, and actually had a lot of really good buddies, a lot of friends who were from here, from various cities in India. So Penn actually has one of the largest Indian communities of any of the Ivy League schools in the U.S. And it was something, so I was fortunate I had a lot of good buddies who were from here, and I was actually studying India and China, because at the time, this was 2003, 2004, 5, 6, 7, that was a time when India was really thriving, really starting to come up and move very, very quickly. And for me, as someone who always would love to travel as a young kid, I always knew I wanted to do something here which could be potentially very impactful. But of course at that time I was 19, 20, very wet behind the ears, had no idea what I really wanted to do, except for the fact that this is like a really cool, interesting potential prospect in the future. And so kind of for me, fast forwarding a little bit, so when I graduated school, my first job was actually in finance, but I went to work for a bank that focused within energy and clean tech. So at that point, doing work in solar, wind, energy storage, biomass. So I was always really interested in sustainability, and so thinking about development kind of in the right kind of way. And so because this was a challenge that the U.S. was facing, it's a challenge that India was facing, China, all of these countries were facing this problem fundamentally, about clean power, about sustainable transport, how you can do this sort of at scale. And for me, I thought a great way to do that initially was to think about finance and think about how you could make a large-scale impact on projects, etc. And I was fortunate where this was 2007, 2008, 2009. I had an opportunity to actually work in India. I had an office actually here over in Secunderabad. And so we did a lot of deals across Pan-India, again, looking at sort of wind, solar, coal to gas, so a lot of these clean infrastructure, clean energy deals, trying to make a large disruptive impact. The challenge, as probably a lot of you guys know, is when you're trying to do something like that, where these are 2,000, 3,000 crore, 5,000 crore projects, they're very large projects. Unfortunately, in India, the context, these things often get stymied by the government. There's a lot of regulatory involvement. It's not too, pretty soon thereafter, I was at the point where I was totally jaded and was like, no, I can't deal with this. Like, I want to do something really impactful. It's an awesome opportunity to make a huge impact here in India, but you can't do it this way. I mean, I wanted to do it before I had all my hair fall out and before my grandkids were born. So it was something where I said, well, okay, how do you kind of go about doing something which is going to be really impactful sort of from the sustainable development side? How do you do that without having to worry about all this governmental largesse and so this sort of chicanery? And so I said, well, why not do something really, just think about a technology company, really do something really from the ground up, bottom up, where you have a lot of virality, a lot of network effects, where you can sort of leveraging social media, think about how you can use that as a tool, and create this really large groundswell and really large impact, which can become, again, very, very viral and very disseminated, and so you can touch hopefully millions of folks. And that was really sort of the idea, is if you could build a business that were kind of around those principles. And for me, coming from the finance side, coming from the energy side, infrastructure side, I knew that there were a lot of large-scale problems to be cracked. But for me, and again, as a citizen of New York and someone who had traveled globally a lot, realized that whenever you're thinking about really big cities, one of the core problems is sort of the personal mobility, thinking about car ownership, thinking about really how you can kind of get from point A to point B in around the city, and then coming back again, roaming across the city, going outside the city, how you can really do that in a very fluid, very convenient, flexible way. I thought it was a really challenging, really exciting problem to tackle. And looking at it in the Indian context, and this was in early 2011, when I was really starting to think about what opportunities could be done here. and saw that no one was doing anything around sort of self-drive car rental in any Indian city. It was just no one had even conceived it. And for me and my co-founder David at the time, it was totally stunning, because for us it was like an aha moment as someone like hit us over the head with a hammer. Because if you look out in China, in Europe, in South America, in North America, this is a thriving model in all of those places. Now, the iterations there, it behaves a little bit differently in China than it does, say, in London. But it was something which had actually came up and thrived in all of these places. And the fact that it wasn't in India, to me, seemed like an outrage, and seemed like a crime. And so, again, my co-founder and I, we decided, well, look, this is something that we earnestly do want to take a shot at. And this was in 2011, and then into 2012, spent 3 months on the ground, kind of, again, moving around, roaming across different cities, talking to thousands of people, such as yourselves, just kind of getting feedback in both a qualitative and quantitative way. We did market research and all of those good things. But I think ultimately it was really about just having the conviction, knowing that this is really a problem where there is sort of a market fit to what we're trying to do. And so we had enough validation in all of these several thousands of discussions and this research that we knew that this was something where, okay, we didn't know how large it was going to potentially be, but we knew it was an opportunity that was definitely worth pursuing. And that was something which really got us really excited. That's why I was really motivated to do it. And ultimately, for me, now at that time on a personal level, I was living in Los Angeles. I was actually in business school. So in the U.S., as you probably know, most of the business schools, 2-year programs, unlike in Europe, where you actually then, typically the path is, you go to school, you go out, you become a consultant or a banker, you work in whatever. I knew I obviously didn't want to do that. I knew I wanted to take the plunge. And so after 1 year, I actually dropped out of business school. So we had actually raised a little bit of money at that point in time. It wasn't particularly a lot of money. We raised about 60 lakh of money initially, and I put in money from my own savings. And basically, all of my life savings were into business at that point. And so I realized that it was something which was worthwhile, and wanted to actually, again, take that leap. And so in September of 2012, I actually shifted and moved to Bangalore, and sort of haven't really looked back. But I think what was really interesting, and I'll kind of get into a more general discussion on the technology side, but what we were actually extremely close to starting the business and totally kind of going under before we even got up and running, so to speak. I mean, this was in October, November, December of 2012. Our plan was actually initially to launch the business in October. We thought that we were going to be able to obtain a permit, a self-drive permit from the government in a very short time frame based on all this feedback we were getting. So we need this license to run our business. And unfortunately, it was something where we were stymied multiple times in Bangalore to try to do this. And we were in a position where we actually literally didn't know how to actually start the business, because we needed this license to run the business, but unfortunately we couldn't partner with anyone at the time. And so there was no real way for us to actually have cars come in to the system and put them onto the road. So this was in early December of 2012. I actually purchased a ticket home for Christmas. I didn't purchase a return ticket because I didn't know if I was going to be able to come back and actually start the business. So at that point, it was definitely a very, very low point in the whole journey. But the point here, and the reason I'm telling on this, is because ultimately we had and someone so very similar to Bashir here in Bangalore, who actually was extremely helpful, a Ford dealer, in fact, who helped with an introduction to a local tours and travels operator, who sort of at the last minute, on December 23rd, the day before I was going to fly home, we inked a deal to actually license his cars, and basically attach his cars where he had a license. He was one of the 5 license holders in the state. So we were literally down to our absolute last breath, and that was something where, obviously very, very grateful for all those relationships that we had built, but it just goes to show, I think, for us, and just to communicate to you guys, and how, really, it's about, especially in the early days, I mean, perseverance it's often very much, so it's a buzzword, but I think it's definitely something that has to be appreciated and looked at very, very closely, because that, in the face of all of this, when you're starting off, I mean, having that sort of resilience and just sort of more hard-headedness, more sort of obstinance, I would say, around that is really, really, really critical. And so, fortunately, we were blessed with the opportunity to get to that point, get over that hurdle, and then we ended up launching the business about 2 months later in February of 2013. And from there, at least on the government side, things have been a lot smoother, so touch wood. But so what I really want to then, that's a lot of the sort of backstory for me and on a personal level. And I think I wanted to touch on mainly three main features, sort of highlights, if you will, that I've seen and come across in the journey thus far. And I think just three pretty simple things. So nothing too earth-shattering, but I think they're very, very meaningful, very impactful for both me and my team, and then hopefully maybe for some of you guys it can be helpful in some ways as you're starting off as well. And so I think really for me the first point that's overarching, and I think in some cases it gets taken for granted, but it's really, so when you think about your mission, the company's mission, the purpose, it's super critical. And of course you as a founder, co-founders, you guys will all have that because you were there in the trenches from the beginning, right? So you started everything, no matter what you're doing. If I'm doing a clean energy startup, if I'm doing a self-drive car rental startup, if I'm doing a B2B SaaS play, if I'm doing something in logistics, it really doesn't matter what it is. You know as an entrepreneur, you're obviously going to have the passion for it, right? You're going to believe in what you're doing. You're going to think it's the most important thing in the world, and maybe you're right. But the point is, other guys who are going to join your team are not necessarily always going to believe that. And inherently, they don't believe the same, they're not going to have the same convictions. And really the number one point that I was mentioning in this is that you really have to make everyone in your company, it's absolutely critical. You have to make everyone feel like owners, not employees. So I say we call it sort of like the army of one, so to speak. So you want to have that sort of buy-in from everyone that you hire, and it's really, really critical that everyone across. So it may be even someone like a call center executive. If you have a call center executive, it doesn't matter. It has to be every single person that has that buy-in with that vision, with that mission, and sort of where you're going. And so really for us, I mean, that was something where particularly it's probably a little bit easier to articulate compared to some other companies, just because we have a sort of very operational presence where you can see the cars every day, and that's something which is a little bit easier for folks to kind of bite on and chew on. And so for us, like for me, the context for us is that we say, simply put, for every car that we can put on the road, we take off road about 20 cars that otherwise would be purchased or roaming, plying in various capacities. And so when we say, well, what does that mean actually? And so one of those cars, actually, one car that we put on road, those 20 cars, I mean, that's around 350 tons of CO2 that you're talking about over the life of a car. And so you can then equate that out and say that's around the equivalent of 1,400 trees that would otherwise not be there. I mean, so it's like if you're planting that many trees. So the point is that that's kind of the imagery that I like to paint when I'm talking to people. And of course, when we're talking about hiring engineers, product people, guys in various domains, a lot of them, okay, some people you often maybe get jaded and think, okay, some people are sort of chasing the money, let's say, because we're a well-funded startup, and so we've raised a decent amount of money and we pay pretty good salaries. And so, but I think what's really, really important is that you kind of cut through all that nonsense, and you make sure that someone really relates on sort of a one-to-one level into sort of the mission of the company. And I think that's really, really, really critical, because too often I see companies lose that attachment, and then especially when you're dealing with people who are at like a mid-level or senior level, when you're thinking about your management team, you really absolutely have to have that. Because the reality is, okay, I work over 100 hours a week. You're working nonstop. You work 7 days a week. You're working 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m., and that's going to be there, right? So the point is, you want to have people who can kind of be there alongside you in that journey, and so you want to have those senior leaders who can do that, because that's really what it takes, regardless, irrespective of any business you're running. So again, going back to the point, sort of owners, not employees. So I think that the second point for me that's really, really critical is you want to promote, you want to create sort of diversity across the team. So you want to really think, especially for your senior leaders, for maybe the sort of 8, 10, 12 top senior leaders, you want to have guys who come from very different backgrounds and have very, very different perspectives. So sort of point, counterpoint, sort of juxtaposition. Oftentimes, you have sort of cognitive dissonance. I think the worst thing with a startup, I think this goes true probably for larger companies too, is that too often you have guys who are, maybe everyone's from IIT Delhi or something, or everyone went to ISB here in Hyderabad. And this is just an example, but when you get people from the sort of the same backgrounds, the same schooling, it's just you get too much groupthink, too much of the mentality where they kind of don't challenge each other, don't push each other, don't have these sort of these contradictions, these juxtapositions. I mean, that ultimately, when you have people, let's say, and it could be geographical, it could be educational, could be their parents were doing something altogether different. But I think how the mentality and the mindset that they have and bring, you really need to have 4, 5, 6 different kinds of mindsets. I mean, that's ultimately what makes so many startups and so many companies thrive. And I hear it actually all the time from our investors. So our largest investor is Sequoia Capital. They're one of the larger venture funds here in India. They actually, the partner who's on our board, he actually would tell me this all the time as well, saying that, it's something where, and he actually cautioned when we raised our first round of funding from them last year, when you think about hiring, make sure you're not going to hire like guys who are just like all sort of like just buddies. You don't want to have like buddies in the same batch, or just people who are too aligned, because again, then you kind of get all sorts of negative vibes that come from that. And I think that is really important. It's not something that's really discussed as much, but as you're growing, and just to give some more concrete examples, like as you step up and grow as a business, like for us, we have around 2,000 cars today across India. We're in 7 cities. But as we went from 100 cars, which was for us back sort of the beginning part of 2014, to the number today, at each sort of inflection point and step along the journey, your organizational chart is going to change a fair amount. And so the other point that sort of dovetails and tied into this larger point around having sort of the diversity of thought, it's you have to be very, very fluid and flexible in your thinking around the overall organizational chart. And it's something you don't want to, obviously, it never makes sense to create hierarchy for hierarchy purposes. It never makes sense to put in managers for managerial purposes. I mean, we're a very flat company. I mean, we have some light hierarchy, of course, but it's very much a flat structure where ideas can raise up and percolate up. And again, having this sort of diversity of thought across the teams, it really, really does help. But I think one sort of sub point from this is that you really have to think about, again, as you're going, in our case, 100 cars, 500 cars, 2,000 cars, you have to be willing and you have to really push to strive to actually disrupt your own organization from an overall sort of systematic perspective. So if I have X many folks and sort of senior leaders on the product team, and they engage with the engineering team, or they engage with the marketing team this way, that may work fine for 100 cars in our case, or it may work if you have a revenue of 6 crores, let's say. But if you then have a revenue of 50 crores, it may not work. It may not make sense. And so one thing that we've learned, sort of tied into this principle of having sort of diverse thought, you need to be fluid and flexible with your sort of organization to be able to do that and move that needle, and do it quickly too. Because I think if you're not willing to do that, and then if you're having sort of the buddies that are always there, so to speak, what ends up happening is a company can get very much into a rut. And culture is a very slippery thing in the company. You probably hear this spoken about all the time from business school professors, etc. But when you have an inflection point, or when you have something which happens, which ultimately moves culture sort of in a negative way, you have to arrest that very, very quickly. And so that's why this principle, I think, is so important, because it helps you kind of stay focused and realize that certain things need to be dealt with very, very quickly for the betterment of the company. So that's the second main point there. And then sort of the third really, really big point for me is, I think in some ways, from a operations perspective, from a customer perspective, this is really the most critical, because when you're really thinking about your business, and again, it goes back to any kind of company, for our company specifically, what it really is, what it really kind of boils down to is the fact that as you grow, and again, I use the example as when you go from 10 cars to 50 cars to 2,000 cars, and you spread out 1 city, 5 cities, 10 cities, the thing that is oftentimes the most difficult is the ability to sort of maintain an unbelievable, unparalleled customer experience across. So, it's, of course, when you have a very small presence, it's easy because you yourself can control everything. You can be there. In fact, as people ask, what happened, what was your first call center? and say, well, I was our first call center executive. So I'm the CEO, but I was our first call center executive. I was our first fleet executive. So I was on the ground serving customers. I was cleaning cars. I was speaking to customers over the phone. And that's something that a lot of people actually were pretty stunned to hear, and it kind of rolled eyes or rolled heads. But I think that's something which, of course, you absolutely have to do when you're thinking about on the ground, sort of, lead by example and showcase sort of what it means to be really customer centric. But again, that model is not at all scalable, of course. I mean, so and you probably read it in the papers that Sachin and Binny Bansal, like during Diwali, right? Like they were on the phone talking to customers. They delivered gifts during Diwali. I mean, that's obviously a PR stunt, but these guys, I mean, to their credit, Flipkart has been a pioneer in India. I think probably the pioneer in terms of delivering customer experience and really kind of raising the bar for guys like us and for everyone else to think about how we treat, how we engage, how we deliver to customers day in, day out. And I think, that's obviously now percolated down to almost every industry. I mean, you see it, almost all of the mobile app commerce players, this is something which is big. But again, to the larger point here, when you're at that early stage, yeah, of course, it's easy. Yeah, I could do it. Yeah, Sachin and Binny can do that. But as you grow and as you evolve, this definitely has to change, right? I mean, so systems, processes, technology. And so the key piece, I think that's the enabler here is technology. And so that's what I wanted to spend a little bit more time talking about because, again, I'll give a couple of examples for us. Because for us, really, you want to think about sort of from a business process perspective, and you have certain business objectives that you think you know that you want to be able to push out there because they'll be extremely beneficial to the customer. And so for us, again, our example is that, well, what do I want to do? I mean, I want to make the transaction for booking a self-drive car rental, by the hour, by the day. What I want to do is I want to make it super, super easy, super convenient, super flexible so that I can, make a booking in, 15 seconds. I can actually, have a car either delivered to my house or I can go to a pickup point and pick it up conveniently. Go spend 2-3 minutes there, just do a check over once in the car, go in, then go drive around, come back, however many hours, however many days later. Again, 2-3 minutes, hand back the car, very simply, cleanly, just kind of go off. And that, in a nutshell, is like for us, that's about how simple, clean, easy, convenient you want to make something for the customer. But for us also, there's so much that goes back into the sort of the back end of that to deliver this stellar customer experience. And so we're thinking for us, it's about keeping the car really clean. It's about having the car in really, really stellar condition, having the delivery, whether it's to their house or whether they pick up, having that in a very seamless fashion where they know how to get to the site, they can get there on time. So all these different elements. So there's a lot of logistical complexity to it, but it's about sort of how you can think about really understanding where things can break and trying to really infuse technology in that where you can create sort of automation, which is a really, really important point. So you can automate certain systems, certain processes where you, again, the business objective here is to make it easy, convenient, flexible for the customer. So what we like to do, and we always say, a machine can do, some sort of work much, much, much better than a human. So there's certain things that you just shouldn't have. And so for us, one piece where we've been able to do some, I think, some pretty nice work is around actually getting in and out of a car. We've actually architected a solution, so hardware comes software piece, where we actually can, you have this black box that's in the car itself. It speaks to the cloud, and so three-way communication then back to our servers, our side of the business there. And it's pretty simple because the customer actually can pull out his phone, his iPhone, his Android phone, and just with a simple tap, either through the app itself or through SMS, can actually go and unlock the car. So he can unlock the car, start his booking there just very simply, very cleanly, without having an intervention. That's something where, similarly, when you go back, you bring the car, say you go outside the city, you come back, you want to drop off the car, again, pull out your phone, simple process, either drop an SMS or simple tap on the app itself, and there it is. So that removes the need to have unnecessary friction where you have like a 20-minute, 30-minute enabler. And that's just one example for us, but I would sort of urge all you guys, or anyone really for that matter, who's looking at any sort of business that has some operational element to it, think really, really hard about that process. So understand it extremely well from your perspective, understand it really even better from the customer's perspective, and really, figuring out, just go on a whiteboard, figure, what are the 5 main customer pain points, and, really, so think, okay, for me it was, okay, I'm thinking about customers' time. And for us, when you're thinking, I think this is a large megatrend, but people value time so much more today than they did 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. This is not just a trend in India. I think it's a trend globally. But I think particularly here in India, since I moved here 3.5 years ago, in some ways, Bangalore, Hyderabad, but it oftentimes feels like a totally different place because mobile has actually come, and it sounds cliched, but I mean, just think about it in your own lives, right? Like, how many people were just like addicted to their apps 3.5 years ago? It didn't really exist. I mean, it was something. It's hard to believe, but even services that we take for granted, again, like Ola, like Uber, those weren't around in 2012, 2013, really. I mean, it was really just the second half of 2013 when that really started to take off. So, I think it just goes to show that this is an incredible sea change. And now customers, since there's so many of these different startups that have come into this space that, again, are talking about sort of valuing customers' time, thinking about saving time, thinking about efficiency for the customer, thinking about taking sort of offline processes, making them more online. So I think it's really, really important to stress when you're thinking about the business at scale to really understand, again, where in your business process, where in that customer experience can you think about infusing technology, push forward on automation, and deliver this amazing customer experience. Because, again, it goes back to the second point where you will have to disrupt yourself organizationally. From a structural perspective, again, what works at that level, I really don't think it's going to necessarily work to deliver that amazing customer experience at that higher level. And so along those lines, another thing that's really, really important that dovetails and is tied to this is measurement and sort of the data. And we have some of our guys here from the team in Hyderabad, and so they especially on the operations side. So day in, day out, you need, and again, irrespective of your business, but especially if you have an operations focused business, you need to be consistently all the time measuring customer satisfaction. So CSAT, your Net Promoter Score, NPS, which are really, really very valuable tools to help you understand, is your customer really happy? Is he satisfied with the product? Because at the end of the day, no matter if you're really in any consumer-facing business, it's all about your customers and your repeat customer base. Because for us, for Zoom, about half of our customers have actually already used our service. And for a lot of the e-commerce players, it becomes very, very similar. It can be even higher for some of the shopping sites. But ultimately, as you know, I mean, so if that's half our business, I mean, that's our bread and butter. And if we have all these repeat customers, they're only going to repeat and come back if you can deliver them an amazing experience. Because again, I think as we all know, India is the most competitive landscape, most hyper-competitive landscape in the world for every business. And that goes without saying. I mean, obviously, offline and online, right? Like how many thousands of little small Corona shops there are, but there's so many small mom and pop shops, but there's so many other alternatives, like even for our business, if you think about it. I mean, yeah, there's a couple of other organized players in the sort of self-drive rental space. We happen to be the largest, but there are small players that are organized. There's a lot of unorganized sort of tours and travels operators. There's a lot of other options. Like in our instance, our example is, again, how many of you, a lot of people have friends, have cousins, brothers, whomever, who may own a car. You can maybe borrow a car. So, there's the point is there's other alternatives. And India, more than any other country I think that I've ever been in, there's even that many more alternatives. And so because of that, you better be damn sure that what you're doing and what you're building is really world-class from a customer angle. So, I think that is one of the major points. And for us, I can just talk a little bit sort of more. Those are the 3 main highlights. But I'll just talk a little bit more sort of about the vision for us, but really sort of the vision going forward and sort of where I see sort of the technology space going, within the transport space going. I think what we've seen, again, really over the last year, we've seen probably more change, more innovation over the past 12 months than we have over the last 12 years in many instances. But as we come up here, just to highlight, and I think a lot of you guys in the news recently have seen, and in fact I was in Delhi earlier this week, but you guys have probably seen the big news around the whole even-odd number plate and the whole ruling around diesel vehicles in terms of registration bans. Now, I think this is a really, really important point, and not to drift too much on a policy deviation, but I think it's something which I think as concerned citizens, I think everyone is probably pretty excited to see some of the movement on the part of the government and the part of a lot of these sort of civic bodies to push this through, because it has the potential while it's certainly very imperfect at the time, it has the potential to really push things in the right direction as it relates to sort of sustainable development and thinking about sort of infrastructure that can work and be built to scale for taking in the additional 100 million people and be coming into the big cities here over the next 5 years. So I think that's something which I think thinking as a business, well, how do we position ourselves? How do you sort of position yourself to really be able to take advantage of these opportunities that the government may put before you and really may come up as it relates to thinking about the macro environment. And I think for us, we can look out because this is something that in Europe, in China, in the U.S., there's been a lot of sort of path-breaking work that has been pushed out by the government. And what ends up happening is you sort of see an ecosystem sort of form around that. So I think one thing that you often see is like with electric vehicles, for instance, the government comes in, gives sort of a subsidy, something along those lines. You'll have many 10, 15, 20 other companies kind of emerge, kind of coming up around that. But I think for us right now, today, especially with this ruling, I think what's really exciting is that it gives really an opportunity and it really sort of necessitates and helps foster the idea of innovation. And so you've seen a lot of innovations sort of really flourishing as it relates to sort of ride sharing, carpooling, a lot of these other models where, again, you're thinking about sort of scarcity, you're thinking about resources, how you can club them together in a very, very effective way. And I think that's something where oftentimes the government will push these things and rulings will come up, and then you'll see, again, startups kind of mushroom up around that. But so I would just sort of close by thinking about and sort of say that, well, when you think about sort of innovation and when you're thinking about opportunities that come up and arise around you, really think about those sort of those wedge areas. Think about those gaps in general where there's really a lot of customer pain. So you think about where opportunities exist, whether it's something where it's very much driven by offline processes, let's say, whether it's driven by some huge inefficiency that you see, and something that really, of course, really annoys you or annoys someone who's very, very close and around you. Because I think that ultimately, then what you're trying to tackle. You have a sense, you have a real core understanding that what you're trying to do, what you're trying to build, what you're trying to fix is worth doing in the first place. It's really, really impactful. And I think that's something that, again, tying it back to the very beginning of the discussion, when we started ZoomCar, when we thought about, okay, self-drive car rental, that was really what it was, right? I mean, it was about, kind of wedging in, thinking about those inefficiencies, thinking about where something is broken, is not working, or is not getting done, and trying to create, again, a very, very customer-centric, very customer-focused solution that ultimately is going to drive a really transformative impact across hundreds, thousands, hopefully millions of people's lives. And that's what it was about for us. And I would sort of urge everyone to really, as you're thinking in your own ventures going forward, really look at those principles, and hopefully that can guide you and help make a large impact. So I think with that, I'll probably wrap up and have some questions. So thanks. Yeah.
I can see plenty of questions. Start here.
I have two questions.
Sure.
First, I ask about when you start, when the first idea you pursue in your mind and you think okay, now I can do some business. Now after some initiation you started. Now when you feel the competition and when you feel that this idea is unique or this idea is not unique but it's different, and how to deal with the competition. Yeah. Number one, and this competition is really idea somebody actually is working on there's different silos. Somebody is working with the idea is already halfway, and that idea is half cooked with somebody, and you have already you reach to some level different. How you tackle that kind of a thing? Number one, and number two, when you discuss about the three pillars which you have for ideas to run the business in your company. Those are when I see it's very fundamental. When you deal with any organization, these kind of ideas remains always. You have, you be friend with your employees or treat them as a one. Like there's a movie called Salesman of the Year. I don't remember Ranbir Kapoor movies. There's the same. He treated everybody is a similar person. Though he, he faced some fallback. So this is the actually idea to run the same business, or the three silos, making everybody one, think like and be friendly, and is the really idea, but it's a fundamental.
Okay, sure. So maybe just to address those points first. So I think you maybe misinterpreted a little bit what I was saying. So when I was saying sort of the army of one, remember I was saying owners, not employees. So the point is it's actually very different from what you just said. So what really it's about is creating people, having an ownership culture, having a buy-in where people, when they go to work every day, they should feel like I own 100% of this company. They should feel like I'm the CEO of this company, as in like I'm empowered to make. Sorry? No. So that's what I'm saying. So that is what we have to strive for every single day. The way, and again, this is not easy. This is actually the hardest thing you could actually do. This is definitely not easy. But the point is, the way you do that is by every rung, every step of the way, giving these guys the opportunity to drive initiatives and allowing their voice to be heard constantly, and actually giving them the power to go out and implement. And if they have an idea, if they say, okay, well, X, this is how our operations are actually performing right now, and if I say, well, we should be tweaking this here, and that's going to mean this type of customer experience over here, well then, we should actually give them the freedom and flexibility and power to actually drive those things, and have that. Okay, well maybe I have a manager, I have maybe a director of product who's overseeing it, but the point is that you have to be willing and able to actually go and action those things. And I think with startups, it's obviously a lot easier than if I were at Infosys, right? But the point is, so many of these companies have unnecessary hierarchies where you don't have that, and people come in and they think it's about a 9-to-5 job. And that there's a reason why you have the best companies will have junior people just working for no reason at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday night, right? I mean that's how you build that sort of culture. You have this burning sensation where people actually want to do that work. Where it goes back to really connecting with the vision. If they know that we're going to be disrupting transport, if they know that we're going to be again helping to really reduce air pollution and reduce congestion, they're really motivated by that. That's a powerful idea. I mean, it's like when people think about electric vehicles, there's a reason why Elon Musk is probably the most successful entrepreneur in the world in building Tesla and building these other companies like SolarCity and SpaceX, because people just have this unbelievable burning desire to work for not just for him, but for the idea. And I think that's critical.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Greg, what you have done is mighty impressive. But it's also much more impressive that you came in from the US and did here. India is a difficult place to work in.
It is.
And I find it quite perplexing that you could actually make this happen as an American here. What were the big challenges that you faced?
Sure.
While traveling these last 2 years or 3 years of work?
So I'd say it's not a difficult place to work. But yeah, I mean, what I would say, I think one really important point though is, and I didn't really touch on it much in the talk. We've actually been incredibly fortunate. I mean, to have partners and guys like Bashir, but we have people like that in every single city. And I think having strong partners who you work with, and whether they're on the automotive side, whether it's in the real estate side, whether it's with a sort of large restaurant group, let's say, whether it's someone who is helping facilitate parking and siting where you work with closely. So in our business, there's obviously any number of those different verticals that we work closely with. And the one big challenge is when I was coming into Bangalore, when you had a couple of local guys who were helping on some operational points, but having really strong business partners in those initial cities for us, I mean, it was tricky to find them. But you have to keep going to different events, meeting people who will introduce you to friends of friends of friends. And I think it's really about, more than anything else, sort of being tenacious and sort of understanding sort of the intricacies and the complexities of sort of the Indian business ecosystem, and really understanding sort of like the connections, the layers, like who's connected to who. So where, because in some cases, it's actually helpful to go on whiteboard and just sort of think about sort of the relationship ecosystem and sort of see where people can be sort of useful and helpful in your venture in terms of guidance. I think that was really important, but yeah, no doubt that the government, as I sketched out that story early on, that was a huge, huge challenge that we faced early on for the first 6 months. And really only after that were we able to kind of take a sigh and have a really breath of relief and understand that, yeah, we could go and operate. But now it's interesting because as we evolve, those changes and those challenges actually become very different. So early on, yeah, raising money, it was very challenging. It was hard, right? So that was tough. And really, you have to keep proving your business, keep proving out the customers, keep showing all those repeat customers come back. So, sort of funding and hiring were really enormous challenges. So hiring, especially actually, I mean, you might think maybe it's an advantage. It could be a disadvantage being an American doing the business here. But the reality is a lot of people early on were very, very skeptical, had a lot of doubts around the business, around my commitment, my dedication. A lot of people say, oh, well, you're American, like you won't be able to handle, and yet you can't handle the food, the climate. So people say you'll go back home in like 6 months, 1 year. So a lot of guys, again, smart guys who are engineers or whomever, they, for rightly or for wrongly, they had doubts about kind of joining up. And I think, again, the only way to sort of silence those doubts is time and kind of the traction and the success of the business. So you just have to keep building up that story. And it's to what I was saying earlier, it's about projecting that vision and that mission, sort of, this is why we're here, this is why we exist. It's always about starting with why.
Greg here, Professor Kiran. I'm going to probe you a little further about the why aspect of what you've said. Sure. The locus of action in the automobile industry shifting from Detroit, Michigan to Silicon Valley. You have the Google cars and right. Hyperloop. You've alluded to Elon Musk. Twofold question. The first one is, you could so easily have started your venture in Silicon Valley as opposed to starting it in Bangalore with all its chaos and what do you call it? The second aspect is, as a business school teacher, as a professor, one of the mantras that I share with my wannabe entrepreneurial students is that while persistence is important, letting go of the past is equally important. I give them the example of Steve Jobs, who's kicked out of Apple by John Scully, comes back after 12 years. He came back only because he was able to let go of the past and the bitterness. Right. The question A is why Bangalore, India, and the second part of the question is, when does an entrepreneur take a call as to thus far no further, as far as his venture is concerned?
Yeah. Okay. Sure. So yeah, just the first point of that. So why Bangalore? I think for us, actually, to the first point though, it's something that we really couldn't have done actually in Silicon Valley because really this type of business or the nature, the idea of self-drive car rental have been done in several different iterations in the U.S. So if you look at ZipCar, you look at Hertz, Avis, Enterprise, all of these guys, Car2Go. So those 5 guys have a very, very dominant market share. They're doing what we're doing, and we have really taken this model, turned it on its head, and adopted a lot of sort of very customized, localized products. So the idea of delivering a car to a doorstep really had never been done anywhere outside of India. I mean, we're the first ones to do this really globally. So that's an innovation that was really born and brought up in the Indian market, now allowing flexible one-way drops over time here too. That, again, those are Indian innovations or innovations that we brought here in India. But, it was something where, I thought this was a huge white space. And as you know, as a professor there, when you're looking at having a first mover advantage is huge. And when you're in an ocean of opportunity sitting where, if I look at the largest company in China doing this today, it's a $5.5 billion market cap. And we always talk about it with the team here. It's a company that has 1 lakh cars. 1 lakh cars. The Chinese market is 1.8 lakhs for the top 3 players. Cars. There's in the market here, it's just over 3,000. So, I mean, that's astonishing to think how much the early days we are in this rental market. If you look at pure numbers, so China does about 7 to 8x the number in terms of volume that we do in terms of sales as India on a country level. So the fact that there's such a wide disparity between rental for us was all we needed to really hear. And to the second point, though, and so just to say with Bangalore, why Bangalore and not, say, Delhi. Bangalore is a market, as you know, I mean, it's certainly the innovation hub of India. It certainly has the largest IT crowd, largest sort of nomadic population, but people not from Bangalore. I think probably 75% of our customers are North Indian in Bangalore. But it's a market where people are certainly very, very flexible, very sort of forward thinking, and there's a lot of outstation trips. and there's a lot of chaos in the city. And the chaos is good because it means that people don't want to own a car. They don't want to. No one. If you talk to, I don't know how many of you guys are from Bangalore, but if thinking about Bangalore, no one wants to drive a car every single day in Bangalore. I'm sorry, no one wants to do it. It's a chaos. I mean, people were complaining. I heard about complaints about the traffic in Hyderabad tonight. I mean, this is like 2 a.m. in Bangalore, so it's not so bad. So I think that actually bodes well for our business. So the second point, which is actually a much tougher question, I think, that there's honestly no good answer there. I think really when you think about sort of when, is it really just sort of when to call it quits, so to speak? I think really for us, I mean, I was about 2 days away from calling it quits. I mean, because if we'd raised money, I was about to I had an email written to hand the money back to our investors in 2012 because, there was really, and at that point, thankfully, we hadn't spent too much of it, but there was nothing we could have done. If we didn't have the legal permissions to start the business, then, what are you going to do? Because I didn't want to go to jail. I was in a new country. I didn't want to do something where I would be locked in a Bangalore prison for 5 years. That was not the ideal. But what really you think about, I think when you're fast forwarding and actually say you start your business, I think you obviously want to iterate and keep pivoting to the point where, not that you're out of pivot, so to speak, but you realize that there's just no product market fit. I think you obviously that's the number one thing you're always thinking is what I'm sort of basically offering, my service, my product, is it being used by customers? Is there real value there? And this is an iterative process, so there's no way where you can say like I can't quantify that necessarily, but you'll pivot probably say 3 or 4 times, and if you realize that there's not that fit and you can't scale that and grow a customer base, well then you're probably just going to move on.
Yeah. Like everyone, I have 2 questions. First question is, like you said, transformation of the operational activities using the technological advancement that is very important for any business.
For sure.
Since you are from finance background, we want to know to what extent you can rely on any person. If you want to take support of any engineer, if you want to hire an engineer, then how do you ensure that this is the best engineer? Or if you want to take support of any other consulting firm which is specialized in this, so how do you ensure that the product which they develop is the best app or maybe the best website or whatever thing we use in the technical process? That was my first question. Second question is not specific to ZoomCar. There are a lot of startups which are coming up in India, and they're giving a lot of referral bonus, discounts, and a lot of private equity funds are being used for discounts and various other things. So is this another financial bubble coming up in India, like which has happened in US, in which we call .com bubble? Yeah.
So those are that's a tough one. But I would say, look, I mean, whether it's a bubble or whether it's not a bubble is really irrelevant, right? Because the reality is a lot of great companies are getting built today, and there are a lot of companies that aren't great that are getting built today. And whether you're in a bubble, whether you're not in a bubble, it just means that when you're in a bubble, a lot of the companies that are not great that are getting built are ultimately going to get funding, and they're going to crash and burn. But reality, okay, 90% of these companies are going to fail, and they are going to go under. But the point is, if I look back, and you mentioned the example of the first tech bubble in the U.S., but coming out of that, well, you know what company was built? Google. I mean, Google came out directly out of that. Facebook came out directly out of that. 2 of the most successful companies in the world today. So the point is, and you have companies that are, yes, raising money today in India at insane valuations, very, very high valuations, and many of them have course corrected. You've seen a lot of, even in the last 3-4 months, there has been a lot of carnage in certain spaces, like in food tech, some of the logistics players, and you'll see more and more of these companies will ultimately fail. But the point is, there are going to be 1, 2, 3 companies emerging out of these different sectors that are going to work and make a lot of sense. So I think, and this is something you saw in the U.S. probably 2-3 years ago, and now India is sort of caught up on that. But I think what's a really more important point than so whether it's a bubble or not is actually when you think about the mentality and the mind shift and that transformation. So if I go down the road here to ISB, or if I go to Triple IT, or if I go to IIT Delhi, or any of the top schools, whether it's engineering or business schools, now if you go in and you talk to the halls, you talk to professors, you'll hear that so many people now today And this was not the case even when I came to India 3 years ago. So many people today want to go and work in a startup. And I think that is really, really exciting. And that this is something where India was definitely lagging US and China a little bit in this mentality. But that's now changed in the last 12 months, 18 months. And I see it because, we've recruited all these ITs and these top business schools. And so we definitely see that mentality shift. And it's so much easier to get the best cream of the cream to come work for you. And I think that's really, really exciting. So that's the point there. To your first question, I think it was maybe more along the lines of, well, how can I, someone from a finance background, sort of assess sort of tech talent or product talent? I think, it's obviously, again, I've certainly learned a lot, and I have a lot still to learn in my role. But that's something where, to be honest, I didn't know anything about technology in 2012 when I came in and started this business. I knew probably a decent amount about finance and about doing deals and transactions and operations, but definitely did not know a thing about technology. Certainly did not know a thing about mobile. On one level, I was actually teaching myself how to code, doing online courses, and that actually helped a little bit. But then, I just talking to so many people, so many friends who were working in the space in the U.S. and India, that certainly helped. But I think you need to, as I was mentioning with one of the earlier questions, where you have a strong local business champion in different cities, you need to have a couple of sort of strong third-party sort of technical champions, so to speak, people who you can lean on and really trust. And that's ultimately how we hired our CTO, was that way, and that was great. And then over time, once you take in funding, and this is another place where you can take some strategic investors, and oftentimes investors can really help. And not even just like the Sequoias of the world, the venture capital funds. I mean, obviously they can help with referrals and screening people, and they do a nice job there. But I think a lot of some of the powerful angel investors, particularly in India, and look, I mean, if you look as an example, the Bansals for Flipkart, Kunal, Snapdeal, all these guys, they do a lot of angel investing, right? They do a lot of seed investing on their own. And it's exciting to tap their minds because a lot of these guys, as you think come up in your venture, they can also add a lot of value. And in fact, that did happen for us with some of our angel investors who were able to help out there too.
Hi, Greg. My name is Surya. Thanks for articulating the journey of ZoomCar so well. I have only one question. My question is what is your typical customer profile? Because I can understand self-driven car works very well in US because you have a fantastic infrastructure. But here, with this kind of traffic problems and parking issues, I would like to prefer somebody drive a car for me rather than me driving. So what is your typical customer profile? Thank you.
Right. So that's a tough one to tackle. In fact, I was actually talking about this earlier tonight with some of the guys. But to be candid, to be honest, there's really no typical customer profile because it really, and this is really, you can build this up about a lot of different businesses. It's when we think about consumer businesses, and particularly our business, and to the guys, the Hyderabad team here, it's all about use cases, and it's all about sort of building up those different ideas and those use cases, those reasons for using the service. And so, as an example, just a couple. During a weekday, for instance, say it's a Tuesday, right? Say I'm coming into Hyderabad from Bangalore. I'm here for a day, 2 days. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense for me to pick up a car from the Hyderabad airport from GMR and then roam around the city. I have a lot of different meetings. That's going to be it's going to be cheaper than a taxi or a chauffeur service. 30 to 40% cheaper. B, it'll be more convenient and flexible because I'll have that comfort of just being able to kind of go off when I want. And and then C, I'm usually going to be okay at a hotel or a different corporate. So parking is no issue. So that's one really, really big use case where you have people coming in during the week for business purposes, but you also have very, very strong folks who are if I think about university students over at ISB or IIIT or wherever it may be, during a weeknight. You want to go out for 4 or 5 hours with a large group of people. You want to go and take a car, take an SUV where you can fit everyone into one car, have that common experience. That's actually a huge advantage. Thinking about, you can take a Merc, go out on a date with my girlfriend, go wherever, so impress her as if this is my own car. That's something which certainly it's a powerful use case. It's even more powerful in Delhi and Chandigarh, right, because of the mentality, I'd say. But Hyderabad too, I think it works well. So, but then on the weekends, then the obvious cases, folks who are going out of station. People now Hyderabad probably doesn't have as many destinations that are like 2-3 hours away, like Bangalore, Pune, or Bombay. But people here, they still roam all the way to Goa. Maybe I'll go to the coast on the east side. I'll go to Vijayawada. I'll go. So there's a lot of different spots that you can go and get out of the chaos, mini chaos of Hyderabad on the weekends. And so we have, it really ranges. I mean, 18 to 35 is definitely sweet spot. I mean, certainly the salaried professionals for us in the 20s, that's obviously great business group. But we've been seeing more and more people who are 35, 40, 50 plus taking the car and going with their families. When people, and the beauty, and this is actually one of the best things, whenever I talk to American investors, I always say one of the best things about India is that the families are very large. And so it really works, and the extended families, right? So a lot of cousins, cousin brothers, and so that's actually great. Because then that means, if I have 2 cars, but I have 5 adults, 6 adults, well, that's a real dilemma, right? Why are you going to go and buy 5 cars? I mean, so sorry, 5 cars, yeah. So it's only you buy the Ford cars. But yeah. So I think that's really, in a nutshell, why, a lot of more, elderly people and more people who, again, have large families already, kids, even grandkids, would actually use the service.
Yeah. How do you make sure that the customers don't damage your cars? Because I have a 4-wheeler license, but I don't know how to drive.
There's a lot of you out there.
Yeah,
right?
2 more questions I have.
But you admitted it, so yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah. So I think it's certainly something that, obviously not all of our customers are amazing drivers. Unfortunately, it's a little challenging. You can't screen driver quality in advance, and this is something actually I've been pushing the government on this whenever I've spoken to people like in the transport ministry, etc. We need to have a more robust system across states of sharing. So like an example is, and some of you guys have probably been to the States, been to the U.S., and you've seen or heard from friends or relatives that we have a system in the U.S. where if I'm from New York, right? So, but if I were in California, and when I was driving California when I was in business school, they would actually exchange records, the DMV. So the RTO, the DMV is the equivalent of the RTO in the U.S. So they would know. So basically, if a police guy pulled me over in L.A., he would be able to access and see my records. And so, but then car rental companies could also access records. And so that sort of online DB, the database of sharing, was pretty powerful. And that's something which, unfortunately, is not available. So, if I have a guy who's from Bihar, from West Bengal, who's in Bangalore, or Hyderabad, I'm stuck. I don't know what he's actually done. Now, that said, that's not the end of the world because insurance is there. So we have very strong insurance partners, both in the private sector, public sector. So these guys have been very instrumental. And we've been able to go ahead and do a lot of path-breaking stuff on the insurance side to ensure that we're covered in these different capacities. Now, we also do a lot of investment on our own on some hardware and some technology that can monitor and track. So we have a system that can track real-time driving behavior, which can give us a lot of insight into how the customer is performing. And then that ultimately is data that we use to, we can incentivize and we can have sort of, carrot-stick approach, which are ways that you can kind of, slowly nudge people into better driving behavior. So a combination of really different things.
One question per person hereafter. I mean, there are too many people waiting. So we'll not allow more than one question. After this lady, it will come to you.
Let me first compliment you on your amazing understanding of this country in such a short time, the complexities that reflects in your answers.
I think, yeah.
When a company like yours has started in the US in a completely different culture from India and you're scaling up, usually it tends to centralize its processes because it becomes process driven.
Right.
Processes for them to be effective have to be culturally rooted too. So how do you balance this need to centrally design a process yet make it culturally rooted? How did you handle that? And specifically within that, the attitudes of the human resources, because that's the key thing in a customer interface. How do you deal with them? Because you may have a ready-made attitude culturally in the US, but here maybe you have to train them. How do you manage that? So
yeah, that's very fair. That's a very astute observation, I would say. But yeah, I think the point. So we're based in Bangalore, right? So our HO, our corporate team, is in Bangalore. So 100%. So I'm actually the only non-Indian in the entire company. So 100% Indian in terms of our employee base, aside from myself. And it's something though in Bangalore, that was our first city for the first roughly 15 months, 15 and a half, 16 months. And for us, it was quite easy to control things just being in one city. As soon as we actually started to multiply and go out to 2, 3, 5, 7 cities, then you really have to think about really having a very strong localized team in each place. Because the reality is, so Hyderabad is different from Bangalore. Delhi is very different from Bangalore. Chennai is quite different from Mumbai. So you want to have a strong presence of 3 or 4 guys. We like to kind of keep it to that sort of level of around 3 or 4 strong business guys in each location who can kind of run with an entire region and sort of understand sort of the hyper-local culture and the nuances, the preference. So I think the one rule that we like to follow, again, this is a rough guiding post. Nothing is concrete, but around sort of like the 80-20, where it's like 80% will be sort of standardized from the corporate side and from Bangalore, and so pushing that down across cities. And then around 20% will be sort of customizable, flexible, where I'll say, okay, yeah, in Hyderabad we want to do things a little bit like X as opposed to like Y in Bangalore. And examples in Hyderabad would be certainly thinking about we focus and build a lot of sort of around the city use cases where, because we know that you're not going to necessarily see as many folks going very far out of the city, out of station during the weekday. So we really kind of focus and customize our use case marketing building very differently in Hyderabad. But then now what I'll say is, to your second point, on the HR side of things, well, again, the whole company being here in India, but the HR team, we really focus a lot on sort of employee sort of empathy building and sort of training. So the training, particularly on the call center. So I think what your comment was particularly relevant for the customer care teams. And so there has to be significant soft skill and hard skill training. So in the U.S., I think the one place where the U.S. is probably still a lot stronger than India is around soft skill training and soft skills for people who are of the sort of the lower income brackets. I think that's whether it's for a call center executive or a fleet executive who's on the ground with the vehicle. Part of it's education, but part of it is sort of just the training and sort of the background of the folks. And I think because of that, we take a lot of great care, and our team here in Hyderabad does a great job on this as well, as thinking about sort of that empathy side of it, internalizing. But we have internal and external facing training. So we actually have a third party that comes in. We design a curriculum and a program. We do a lot of gamification around that, because what we realize is that guys who are at that level, who may not have the best educational background, but of course these guys are very hungry, very passionate, very motivated to earn well and do well and move up in society, which is of course very admirable. And I think what's really important for those guys is finding that connection. And I think we've always been able to do that, I think, decently well, in the sense that we've been able to push with some of these third-party trainers, as well as designing our own curriculum for both hard skill empowerment and sort of soft skill training. And one final example on the hard skill, we were actually doing this today in Bangalore. We're doing an Microsoft Excel training for our fleet executives. And so these are guys who are, again, they're earning a much more modest salary, sort of more on a monthly basis, where they're with the cars, kind of cleaning the cars, maintaining the cars, fueling the cars, sort of doing a lot of the on-ground last mile ops. But now, empowering them, giving them some additional skills, like the Microsoft Excel training, I think is very, very helpful, because it helps both from their employee morale standpoint, and then it also translates into sort of better customer engagement, customer experience, because these guys are just a better knowledge base, more motivated. So those are just a couple of examples.
So, have you ever considered having two-wheelers like scooters or motorcycles in this thing? Because India is essentially a two-wheeler country.
Yeah, it is. That's certainly a very interesting point. Now what I'll say though is just to stop you, because if you say it's a two-wheeler country, yes, it is, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the best two-wheeler rental country, right? Because a lot of people own two-wheelers. So if you look at across the tier 1 cities, typically you have anywhere from 15 to 20% car ownership in terms of per household. 15 to 20% of households will own a car. Now in the tier 1 cities in India, you're close to 45 to 50% for two-wheeler ownership across households. So inherently, you have to think about the use cases very differently. We have thought about this for some time. I think the car market is so darn big in India that we can be doing this for a long time. That said, a lot of the technology that we're doing, a lot of the ops that we're putting in place and building is something which can easily be replicated for two-wheelers. So it's definitely not far off or wild imagination to think that we could certainly go and look at executing and doing that. There's a lot more regulatory uncertainty around that. There's certainly some nuances that you would have to think about. But I think there are a couple of companies that have come along and are doing some good work there, like Wicked Rides and a few others. But it's still early days for the bike side of it. And you probably saw recently Baxi and a couple of guys up in Delhi have started doing bike taxi operations. The Delhi government's been pretty progressive, sort of ironically that they're allowing this. But that's something which will come up too. So I think it's certainly something that we could think about in the future, but not right now. So.
Hello. 20% of this country has actually access to internet, out of which 14% actually has a smartphone. out of which, if I might add, 10% may have an internet connection in their smartphone. So do you think that your strategy of going app only, wherein a very few people or section of this country has actually access to an internet connection on their smartphone, is a wise strategy? And you mentioned Elon Musk. So I would like you to also, have you read about Peter Thiel, who recently came out with a book called 0 to 1, Notes on Startups and Future. He said that competition is a perfect recipe for losers. Because competition, what it does is, it actually, when many people come into competition, the real beneficiary is the customer, not the player. Because the player, in order to survive in the competition, keeps on giving discounts, as we are seeing now with Uber, Ola, you also, I believe. So, I mean, is there a strategy that you have in mind so that you actually create a business which is able to survive for a much longer period of time rather than...
Sure. So I'll just address a couple of those points. So firstly, I'm not sure where you got the idea that we are app only, but that's definitely not the case. So we're a website and mobile app, so Android, iOS, and website. So for us, a majority of our bookings do come from app, but we still have a huge percentage of our bookings that come from the traditional desktop, from the actual website. So that's something which I definitely don't see a future, a near-term future, maybe even a medium-term future where we would ditch that. For us, app only actually doesn't make sense. So we haven't gone that direction, and I agree with that point, and that's one of the reasons why you want to also have the desktop. That said, I mean, most of our design thinking, most of our product thinking is around the app, right? Because or even around the mobile website, which we're actually in the midst of revamping, because that's something where just think of how much easier, it's so much easier for people to just pull out their phone and, whether you're on Wi-Fi or you're on 3G, that process, it can have a booking be made anywhere, impulse, whether it's impulse or not impulse, it's just so much better, right? So that's ultimately why we are ultimately a lot more bullish on the app. And, to that point, well, we know that also the network connectivity, it's only going to get better right now. If you look at things like Reliance Jio, if you look at the initiatives that Airtel, Vodafone are doing. So, I'm definitely bullish over the next 3, 4, 5 years on that front. To your second point around Peter Thiel, yeah, I know, I certainly read a lot about Peter, but I actually haven't read that particular book. But, I think, I would just say, look, well, what is the largest company? Who is the largest company in the world? Who's the richest company in the world? Apple, right? So Apple is by far, if you look at it, they just look at their cash on their balance, $100 billion of cash. They're the most successful company in human history. They also operate in the most competitive market there is. I mean, smartphones, tablets, computers. So, I mean, I don't buy that at all. I think that's a rubbish argument. But if you look at something though, yeah, every single sector, I've never seen you tell me one company that doesn't have a competitor. I mean, every single company has a competitor. Now, the best companies, certainly when you're building them, ideally, as I said for us, we didn't have a direct competitor for 18 months. And that was a huge advantage. I absolutely agree that is hugely beneficial. When you're starting a company, it's always better to be the market leader, the market maker. There's no doubt about it. But no company is immune from competition. And to think otherwise is totally ridiculous.
Okay. So, based on your successful experience here in Bangalore, what would you say are the two main strengths that the Indian ecosystem offered? Something that is unique and that helped you.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think one of the things that was extremely beneficial for us is that, and I think we all know, there's a huge wealth of tremendous technical engineering talent, and that translates not only to engineering, as into like a CS guy who's going to be a dev, back-end dev, front-end dev, mobile app guy. It also translates into really people who think very well, very structured, sort of mechanical thoughts and around adopting those engineering practices and thinking about operations in that sort of systematic way. That's something which I think for me, I think India has a lot more talent and a lot more of those type of folks than the U.S. does. And ironically, for us, the guys who are really good in the U.S. are actually of Indian origin. So I think it's part of the discipline and the training from an early days standpoint. And that is really critical because, as I said, our business is very, very operationally intensive. And to have guys who are on our ops product team and who are operations and who are helping to run the cities, having that sort of structure and that thought process and that approach is valuable. And I'd say that's one thing. But the second thing in India is the fact that you have a customer base in general that is, I think, really, really willing and able to really try new things. And I think the youth here in India have probably even fewer preconceived notions than they do in the U.S. I think part of it is because you have this sort of like this crazy leapfrogging effect where where I feel like in some ways we're sort of jumping 3 or 4 different rungs on the ladder in India. If you think the one common example is the desktop computer never took off the laptop, never really took off in India because everyone just went to a smartphone, and you just totally skipped a generation, so to speak. I think that mentality is actually picking up for a lot of the young kids who are in like tier 2, tier 3 cities, and I think that mentality, that understanding, and that sort of consumer psyche is hugely beneficial and actually pretty unique to India. So I just turned, I'm 30. So
I have a very serious question to Greg.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I've always seen you in your
Okay.
work clothes, which is this green t-shirt.
Okay, yeah.
When you're not at work, what do you wear?
Well, I'm at the gym that I'm wearing shorts, but yeah. Otherwise, no, I actually like to wear different t-shirts, so not just Zoom t-shirts, but sometimes I may mix it up with a sport jacket. But yeah, so.
Sir, are the cars that you rent are owned by company or?
So some of the cars are, some are not. Most of the cars are owned by the company, but one thing that certainly there's a lot of other supply models that are potentially out there. I think for us right now, there's a lot of legal murkiness to some of those models. That's something where I think of course people often ask me, well, we actually get these emails, right? So someone will say, I own 2 cars. One of the cars, okay, maybe my wife uses, and she only uses it once a week, twice a week. Can I attach that car with you? And we can do like a revenue share. And, that makes sense for a lot of people. Like intuitively, it's like, yeah, I have this asset, this like 8 lakh asset that's sitting in my driveway. I'm not really using it that much. I'm paying, $25K a month, $27K a month in fixed cost. That's a waste, right? Like why do I have to do that? So that's actually, it's a really interesting model. It's something that unfortunately the government doesn't allow right now today. But there are some other machinations around that model which could potentially take off. I think that's where it becomes a little compelling because you can grow. It's a lot easier to grow a fleet in that fashion, which is more crowdsourced, where you can go from 2,000, 5,000 to 1 lakh cars. Whereas if you're just looking at your own balance sheet, maybe you can only get to 20,000 cars or 30,000 cars. So there's a lot of different options that are going to be out there in the future.
And second question was like someone asked you about two-wheeler. And you said two-wheeler mostly people like to own. Yeah. But now a new category of two-wheelers are gaining ground, and there are super bikes which everyone cannot afford to own. And this is something which people use it more as an aspirational.
Right.
So are you thinking on?
So who's going to use that bike at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday?
Vikram, one second. One question. How many here own or run a startup? I just wanted to understand the profile of this audience today. And how many work for it together with that? Yeah? That's a good number. Okay.
Good stuff.
Carry on.
Okay.
So I have a question. Like India being the second most fast developing countries of the world, and the standard of living of the people are growing day by day. So I just want to know what will be the company's profile down 10 years down the line, or what will you plan after 10 years?
Wow, I probably couldn't even tell you what the profile would be 10 months down the line. So that's pretty tough. So yeah, I think going out in the crystal ball, like as I said 3 years ago, I think I was living in a different country. As in, like India has evolved and changed so much in those 3 years. So particularly Bangalore. I mean, some places. I was just in Chandigarh actually earlier this week, and I was joking. I was like, I was in Chandigarh in 2011, and it actually looks exactly the same. So not every city is like that. Bangalore, Hyderabad is obviously more like Bangalore in that sense. But no, I think there's certainly a lot of different directions and paths that this could go. But I think it's certainly something that we want to be in a position where we'll certainly surpass 1 lakh cars on the road and be across 50 plus cities for sure at that time frame. But and certainly I think we can do that a lot sooner than 10 years.
So, do you consider yourself as a born in the cloud, very technology centric company, or an infrastructure player that's in the cars business? The side of the story why I'm asking this is we live in a country where connectivity is not a given. And when you are looking at assets that are 8 lakhs, 10 lakhs, 30 lakhs, 50 lakhs, it's not very easy to track them. Literally, you could lose cars. So what are the measures? I mean, obviously you have your box and all that, but do you see that security itself, how important is it for a born in the cloud company?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think certainly we have a lot of more sophistication, a lot more technology than just the box itself. I mean, so it's ultimately the software that powers that box, right? It's about the algorithms that you have, about the alerts, the different mechanisms that you have in your back end and your CRM system, which can give you that sort of real-time visualization and ability to understand where your assets are, at what point, when, where, and so how. I mean, those are the questions that our team, so we have a dedicated team that is monitoring and tracking that 24/7. Thankfully, touch wood, we haven't had one of those issues thus far. But yeah, I think you always need to prepare yourself. I think, as I mentioned with one of the earlier questions, insurance. If you're thinking about just tracking of vehicles, I mean, insurance is obviously there, which can provide some mitigation in certain instances. But again, it's not. I actually don't view that as really a real problem. I think that the larger technology challenge is really thinking about building an inventory system which can be flexible and scale to meet the customer requirements. I think that's actually even more critical.
Hi, for insurance. Hi, here.
Oh, sorry.
Yep. For insurance compliance, what are the technologies you've deployed? Do you have onboard cameras? Do you have dashboard cameras? You said you have black box. You have a GPS tracker. What else do you have on board? And how do you factor out all these technologies to price your offering?
Right. Yeah, so we don't have cameras, that's for sure. So I don't know how many of you guys have used our service, but cameras, that would be quite an invasion of privacy. So we won't go down that route. I think certainly there's, as I said, this sort of black box. There's a lot of sophistication within that. So it gives you a lot of additional functionality. So we don't do other, it doesn't really make sense to put like 6 different devices in a car. So it's better to have one device that can give you that flexibility. And as I said, it's more than just the hardware. It's about the software. It's about the analytics. So that's sort of the secret sauce of it. It's sort of how you apply. I mean, hardware in general, hardware is easy. It's commoditized by and large. Not always. That's why you see a lot of these IoT, these Internet of Things companies can go under and struggle unless they have a really well-baked software and analytics stack that associates with that product. So I think that's where we focus and spend a lot of our time, and all of our product thinking kind of goes into the application side.
How many business models were pivoted before coming up with a sustainable model for India? And how much time you gave for each pivot, and what was the team size initially for each pivot?
So we were actually a team of 2. So it was both myself and David, my co-founder. So when we initially launched the business, we had hired a head of operations. And so it was the 3 of us that ran the business. We had some call center executives, some fleet executives on the ground supporting us. But on the business side, it was really the 3 of us for the first 5 months of the business. So it was very, very small, very lean. Then we brought on our CTO after about 4.5 months and then moved from there. Sorry, you were asking pivot or pilot? Oh. No, no, this was the only one. So we didn't do anything else. And the initial pilot, so to speak, was 7 cars in Bangalore at one location in February, March of 2013. So after about 6 weeks, we realized that it was going pretty well, and then we started scaling up and adding cars.
Firstly, thank you for allowing us to experience luxury cars at a very low price.
Sure thing.
And my question is, 90% of the startups fail when they are scaling up. And 2 challenges will be there when a company is scaling up. One is ensuring a good quality of human resource. And second one is controlling the burn rate in order to ensure that your investors are with you. How did you deal with these challenges?
Sure. Yeah. So I think one, actually this also dovetails into an earlier question. We actually don't discount much at all. I mean, that's something where you can check out our website. We don't really run discounts. It's something we have a dedicated portion, we call it the deal shack. We have a very small amount of our inventory that will allow you to take at a discount. But you're talking about, for us, over 95% of our business, we don't even touch discounts at all. So that's very, very different from other e-commerce players. And I think again, coming from a finance background, as an investment banker, as a private equity investor, I'm someone who, and you can ask the guys here from the Hyderabad team, I'm very anal about numbers. I'm extremely anal about burn. And so that's something where, I look at it on a line-by-line basis today, even our P&L, and I'll look at I can even look at G&A items for a city. Like if I see a telephone bill that doesn't make sense, I'm going to call it out. But I mean, obviously it's a little bit of an exaggeration. I don't have time to get into that level of detail. Our CFO and the rest of our team does that. But the point is that's the culture that we're driving, and then there's no, I mean, obviously we still have a long way to go, but you want to really stamp out waste. Whenever you're doing a business where it's operationally intensive and there are some assets involved, whether they're your own assets or other person's assets, but I think we have a very different a philosophy of running our business than someone like Ola, where they're kind of blowing a lot of money on marketing, a lot of money on sort of what I would call more senseless headcount. I think that for us, we like to keep a very lean team from a headcount perspective, where we don't really have anything that we don't need, and we also like to keep a very lean cost structure as it relates to all of our different associated operating costs.
Yeah. Any more questions, or I have? Yeah.
First of all, thank you very much for coming here.
Sure thing.
And I wish you all the very best, that you grow more than your expectations.
Thanks.
Secondly, one small suggestion I would like to give, like what we are facing as a customer nowadays. Whenever you call a call center or customer care, they listen to your problem. When they think that the complaint is beyond their reach, they'll tell us, wait a moment, we'll transfer your call. When some other guy comes, I need to explain the same thing to him also. That is fine, I can explain once or twice. If I call them the next time, the same thing I have to repeat. Okay, fine, you are a startup company now, you are doing well. Hope you do even better in the future. One advice what I want to give is, maintaining the customer complaints now will be somewhat easy. When you grow, please make sure that the way you are dealing with people right now, the same standards are maintained. Thank you.
Yeah. You would answer that, or just?
Oh, no, I agree exactly with what you're saying.
Okay.
It again dovetails into the first point during the talk. I mean, I think that's something. That's certainly one of the challenges, or actually, there's a third point in the talk. But that is one of the big challenges as you go 2,000 cars to 10,000. And unfortunately, the reality is the absolute number of complaints will always increase, no matter what, right? I mean, like Flipkart on an absolute number, has thousands and thousands of complaints, but it's about the relative basis, right? So looking at a percentage of, if I'm saying 2% of my bookings have issues, so we look at, and again, I'm very financially oriented, very data driven, as is the whole company, and so we look at the relative percentage step down. So if they say the Hyderabad team, we have 2% of our cases that have complaints around cleanliness, let's say. The point is that we want to bring that down to 1.5%, but 1.5% of 2,000 is larger than 2% of that smaller number. So the point is that, yeah, I think you're always, unfortunately, in our business, you're never going to deliver 100% perfection. But the point is how you deal with the cases which are not perfect, where there was a mistake, how you resolve that, and how do you ensure that you get that customer back in the door so he has a great experience next time. So you, again, build technology, you build automation, you train, and that's really the only way to do it. And I think there's no sort of shortcuts. And the reality is it's not going to be perfect, but you want to get it sort of as close as you can.
You have last 3 questions.
Sure.
Hi. So I'm studying environmental management and technology, so I have a question that's from a very different perspective. So you were mentioning electric vehicles. Do you have them currently, or are you planning on investing in them in the future, or?
So we were the first company in India to deploy electric vehicles in a commercial fleet. So in 2013, thankfully we had some nice press around that, but it was something where, again, sort of personally, having worked with electric vehicles in the past, it was always near and dear to my heart, but it wasn't really a PR stunt for us. We actually genuinely believed that there was a real demand that we could actually go out and satisfy. It's the Revo, so we had the E2O, so we had a couple of those in the fleet in Bangalore. The challenges there with scaling, really, there's not many electric vehicle products in India. In fact, that's the only one, and now they're deploying it, Mahindra's deploying it across other vehicle makes. But there's no tax credit scheme, There's no additional governmental support outside of Delhi. And even with that, it's a very, very expensive car. So you're kind of saddled with that burden. So you really need to think about different sort of leasing structures or cost disaggregation to make that economic. And unfortunately, India does not allow importation of electric vehicles without a 200% tax. So it is a little challenging.
Greg, sometime in future when you exit out of this business and you make your few $100 million, would you have your next startup in India or in the US?
There's a lot of presumptions in that statement, but I know I would say that I think for me, really, again, I don't know how long the journey will go on in terms of whether we'll keep building for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. That's something that's of course beyond my control. We want to build this to a great company that I know it'll still take several years to get there. So I think at some point in the future, of course, that time would come. But I think for me, even if I'm ultimately, say, 10 years from now living in the U.S., I think I would absolutely always have my foot in the door in India with startup ventures, because I think there's so many different things, and it's not just opportunities in India and the U.S., but there's so many other places globally where there's opportunities. But I think India has obviously a very special place for me, near and dear to my heart now, where I see, having lived here, been part of the culture for 3.5 years, I know that there are so many other opportunities, avenues that exist, whether it's in agriculture, whether it's in energy, whether it's in waste. Those are probably the three big ones, or whether it's water, which is something that I know the city sort of suffers from acutely as well. I think those are the places where the next sort of $1 trillion, if you will, come from the Indian GDP, and that's really where entrepreneurs can excel the most, because that's where the government is really screwing up I'd say probably the largest. So
actually, my question was almost identical to him, and it's the last question. Then I've changed it slightly after that. My question was this:
there you go.
What should we do to make you apply for Indian citizenship?
That's quite an interesting one. No, I think so. My business visa expires in about another 14 months, so I'll have to renew that first and foremost, I guess. So 5-year business visa. So that was actually, and people ask about the biggest challenges. Fix the damn visa system. That was a nightmare for me. Like getting my business visa actually took me 6 months, and it was like the most painful process ever. Like that was probably more than anything almost what made me not start the business. That was actually a disaster. But actually, interestingly, that it has in the last 2 years. I know that process has gotten so much better. So that is something I'm definitely grateful for. But,